Defining something that is concrete is very easy because you can see and you can touch it. For example, talking about this dog, we will not find it difficult to do so. This is because it is a concrete thing. We can see it, we can touch it, we can see its features. Therefore, describing it will not be difficult. But what if you are asked the meaning of educational technology? This is not concrete. This is an abstract concept. Defining abstract terms like educational technology is not easy. The definition that a Chinese would give would be different from the definition that a Ghanaian would provide. But we still need to provide clear definitions for it. This will make sure that everyone is on the same page when we talk about the concept. Educational technology consists of two key words that are education and then technology. We will start by defining education and then we will look at what technology is. After that, we will talk about educational technology as a concept and then discuss the history of educational technology. What is education? Aristotle once said, "To live alone, one must be an animal." Human beings are social creatures. We live in communities and interact with others. And because of that, we need to learn how to behave, how to communicate, how to work and live together. So in the context of education, Aristotle's quote implies that in order to function effectively in the society, we need skills, we need knowledge, we need values, and we need attitudes. And what is going to help us to achieve all of that? That is education. So we can define education as a process of training individuals to acquire knowledge, skills, and attitudes to function effectively in the society. Education teaches us the knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes needed to live well with others. For example, if someone lived totally alone, like an animal, they wouldn't need education because there would be no society to interact with. In short, this quote emphasizes that education is necessary because we are social beings who must learn how to live and contribute meaningfully in a society. But the process of training these individuals to acquire these is what is referred to as education. We can therefore conclude that education is a field of study dealing with how to teach or train people. If education is about training the individual, what about how do we call it when individuals acquire these knowledge, skills, and attitudes? That is what is called learning. So learning is the process of acquiring knowledge, skills, and attitudes. And education is the process of training these individuals to acquire the knowledge, skills, and attitudes. But before learning can take place, it can only be facilitated when there is teaching and instruction. If you teach people about history, then you are giving them knowledge. If you help a student to learn how to solve equations, you are equipping the student with problem-solving skills. If you teach a child to say thank you and please, then the child is learning values of the society. But what the individual will learn would depend on the complexity of the society. The complexity would decide the learning activities that should take place. As the society becomes more advanced or complicated, the educational system must also become more complex to match the need of the society. For example, in a fishing community, the main activity is fishing. Learning will focus on practical skills like how to catch a fish, how to make or repair nets and boats, how to read the weather and tides, how to preserve and then sell fish. Most of their learning is going to be informal, but in a more complex society like in a city, people need a variety of skills, not just for fishing, but also for jobs in health, education, finance, and engineering. Learning that happens here normally takes place in formal settings like schools. It involves technology, abstract thinking, research, and then complex systems. So the need of the community will determine what people should learn. We can sum up the definition of education by this definition from Ulians. Education is defined as the intentional activities through which individuals are intentionally cultured into the norms, values, and practices of a society, but in relation to educated individuals' interest. In summary, Ulians is saying that education is a deliberate way of helping people learn how to live in a society, but it should also respect the learner's personal needs and goals. From these definitions of education, we can say that 1. Education presupposes the individual's freedom and possibility of human growth. This means that everyone has the potential to become better, smarter, kinder, and more confident. So education helps us bring out that best version of our lives. Again, we can say that education is a moral practice. This means education is not just about facts. It involves helping the learners understand what is right and wrong, how to treat others, and how to live responsibly in a society. Again, we can say education is value related. It carries and passes on the important values of the society, like peace, honesty, hard work, justice, kindness, and cooperation. We cannot talk about education without mentioning the acquisition of knowledge, skills, and attitude to cultivate the mind. Education helps individuals to gain useful knowledge and skills to develop their minds. From the definitions, we can also say that education is a set of activities. It includes all learning-related actions such as teaching, reading, writing, observation, listening, discussing, and then experimenting. We cannot leave out the fact that education is a process. It is not a one-time event. It happens throughout life in stages and experiences. Education is also goal-oriented. It is done with specific purposes. So, educators use various fields like curriculum design, planning, management, teaching methods, and evaluation. These fields will help them to reach their goals and to guide learning. Now that we know the meaning of education, it is important to note that education is very broad. Teaching and learning is just an aspect of education. So when we say instruction, it is a subcategory of education. Education is a broader concept. It doesn't mean what happens only in the classroom. It goes beyond that. Now that we know the meaning of education, let us talk about technology. What is technology? Before we talk about the definition, let us look at the etymology of the word. It was derived from the Greek word technos, which means art. This reminds us that technology is not just about machines. It started as human creativity and craftsmanship. This reminds us that technology is not just about machines. But at its core, technology is about people using their skills and creativity to make life, just as a tailor will use a needle to sew clothes. People long ago used tools to solve daily problems, and that is how technology began. This is how a famous thinker, John Kenneth Galbraith, defined technology. Galbraith defines technology as systematic application of scientific. Galbraith defines technology as systematic application of scientific or other organized knowledge to practical tasks. This means that technology is the planned use of what we know, and what we know is what he refers to as scientific knowledge. So if you apply scientific knowledge to practical tasks, that is, to fix or improve the things that we deal with every day, that is technology, according to Galbraith. So technology is not just about having these gadgets. It is about using these gadgets to solve problems in the society. So for example, a laptop will make your schoolwork and communication easier. You can type notes, attend online class, or even watch a movie after school. If you have a mobile phone, it helps you check in with your parents, call a friend, or send money all in seconds. If you have a washing machine, it is going to save you hours of washing by hand. If you have a radio, then you are going to be informed, entertained, and sometimes it even teaches you things. Can simply put that technology is the technical means of improving productivity. It helps us to work smarter and not harder. That is it. Whenever we use science and ideas to solve real problems in the society with tools and machines, then that is technology. Laptops, radio, cars, phones, and washing machines were made possible by someone's scientific knowledge, and the purpose was to make life easier and faster. That is, to solve problems that we face. That is the meaning of technology, the application of scientific knowledge to practical tasks. Technology comes in different forms. First, we can talk about hard technology, which refers to the tools or the products as a result of someone's application of scientific knowledge. Can you give examples of hard technology? This refers to the tangible parts of technology, that is, the tools that we can see and touch. For example, if you use a calculator in a math class, then you are making use of hard technology. Also, if you watch a documentary on malaria with a television, you are also making use of hard technology. So we would say that calculator and a TV would be examples of hard technology. In the same way, if you use a printer to produce study materials, then you are also making use of hard technology. These things are tangible and can be perceived. This is what most people think that technology is all about, the tools and the gadgets. However, if we say technology, it goes beyond that. Technology can also be soft. We will call it soft technology. This refers to the ideas and scientific methods that make our life easier and convenient. For example, these students are having a group discussion to solve a problem. Therefore, group discussion can be called soft technology because group discussion is not a tangible thing like a calculator or a printer, but it is a method that is used to solve a problem. Therefore, it is considered as technology. What are some examples of soft technology? One is using group discussions, as we have talked about, to promote active learning. Another is applying problem-solving strategies. Those are examples of technology. Tangible objects and ideas and methods. Both are used in solving human problems. That is why we call it technology. What is educational technology? We know the meaning of education. That is a process of training individuals to acquire knowledge, skills, and attitudes to function effectively in the society. And then we also know the meaning of technology. That is the systematic application of scientific products, resources, techniques, skills, and ideas to solve problems. If we put the two concepts together, then we can say that educational technology is the systematic application of scientific products, resources, techniques, skills, and ideas to solve problems in education. In simple terms, educational technology is about using smart tools and ideas to solve problems in education. It makes activities in the educational system more effective, easier, and meaningful. Educational technology is very broad. It goes beyond the classroom. These are areas where educational technology helps a lot. The first one is curriculum planning. Here, it helps curriculum experts to design what people should learn, especially in the school setting. The next one is instruction or classroom learning. Educational technology supports how lessons are delivered through visuals, videos, smart boards, or learning apps. As you can see over here, instruction, that is what happens in the classroom, the teaching and learning experience, is just a part of educational technology. Educational technology can also help in administration. That is, it helps in managing school records, schedules, communication, and more using digital tools. Educational technology also helps in assessment. It makes it easier to give marks and mark tests, track progress of people, and then give feedback instantly. Beyond the classroom, educational technology also helps in staff development. So teachers also need to keep learning. Therefore, educational technology offers training, webinars, and tools that help them to grow. In conclusion, educational technology is a very broad concept that comprises all of these. To solve educational problems, systems approach was used in the 1950s to do so. To understand the systems approach in education, let us consider this. Let's say you want to prepare something to eat. First, you will go through some series of steps before the food is ready. 1. You will think about the kind of food that you want. This is termed in systems approach as the goal. Second, you will gather the ingredients. This is called resources in systems approach. These ingredients will be put together to make the food that you desire. Third, you will plan the steps that you are going to follow to cook or prepare this meal. After planning the steps, you will follow the steps and then cook the food step by step. Next, you are going to taste the food to see whether there is change to be made. This is called evaluation in systems approach. And then last, you will serve the food that you have prepared. If you are serving it, then it means implementation in the systems approach. To prepare your rice, you need to follow some series of steps. That was all that the systems approach was about. It was a step-by-step method of 1. Identifying a problem. For example, low student performance. If you see that your students cannot read well, then you are going to apply these steps to solve the problem. So the systems approach was a step-by-step method of solving educational problems. You will start by identifying the problem, then planning how to solve it, then choosing the right tools and resources, and then you will test the solution to the problem to see whether it was effective. And the last one is that you are going to improve it if needed. That is the systems approach, a step-by-step method of solving educational problems. Where did the systems approach even come from? As mentioned earlier, it was used in the 1950s. Educational experts in the USA borrowed this method from engineering. In engineering, people solve big problems by breaking them into parts, designing solutions for each part, and then making sure everything works together. This method was called system engineering. So this method of solving problems was adopted in education in the 1950s. This means that educators that time were using this same idea to solve school problems. This became known as the systems approach to education, a step-by-step method of solving educational problems. Why is the systems approach that important in education? Why was the systems approach that important in education? First, it allowed educators to think logically and plan carefully. Also, it made sure teaching and learning were well designed, tested, and improved. Lastly, it encouraged the use of tools like TVs, radios, projectors, and later computers, but in a planned way. To put simply, systems approach was a step-by-step method of solving educational problems. It began by developing an idea to solve the problem, planning, developing strategies, implementing the strategies, and then waiting for the success. Systems approach helps us to know the real impact of educational technology, that is, to solve problems in education. But people normally confuse educational technology with instructional technology. Let us talk about that. We know that educational technology is the systematic application of scientific products, resources, skills, methods, and ideas in solving problems in education. This is very simple. Education is very broad than instruction. If educational technology is the use of scientific products and ideas to solve problems in education, then instructional technology is going to be the systematic application of these same scientific products, resources, skills, methods, and ideas in solving problems in instruction and not education. Instructional technology is focused in solving problems that arise in the classroom where teaching and learning occurs. But educational technology is focused in solving problems in education as a whole by using scientific products, resources, and ideas. That is the difference between educational technology and then instructional technology. In a classroom setting, if we are addressing the problems that we face, or we are using technology to make teaching and learning easier, then it means that we are making use of instructional technology, and it is a subset of educational technology. How do we use technology in instruction? First, we can use resources like videos, books, digital tools, and software when teaching or learning. This will make sure that we understand whatever we learn. It makes teaching and learning easier and effective. Apart from using these tools, instructional technology also implies using teaching strategies like group work, games, or quizzes to facilitate teaching and learning in the classroom. Instructional technology is not just about using the tools. It is also about applying the skills, methods, and ideas. And examples of these methods and ideas are group work, games, or quizzes that are used in solving classroom problems. Aside these, educational technology also involves systems for designing and evaluating learning. These are all areas of instructional technology. Whenever we apply scientific knowledge in solving classroom problems, then that is instructional technology. Let us talk about this official definition of instructional technology by AECT. AECT stands for Association for Educational Communications and Technology. It is a professional organization in the United States that brings together educators, researchers, and designers who are interested in using technology to improve teaching and learning. How do they define instructional technology? According to the AECT, instructional technology is the theory and practice of designing, developing, using, managing, and evaluating teaching tools and processes. Let us break down their definition to understand instructional technology from their perspective. The practice of designing, according to the AECT, means planning how learning will happen. For example, making lesson plans, choosing activities. And then the practice of developing means creating the actual tools or the materials, such as slides, videos, apps, worksheets, or games. It is like making actual tools from your teaching plan, turning your ideas into things students can see, hear, or touch. Using here means that using those materials in class, during a lesson or an activity. Managing, in their definition, refers to how we organize and control everything. That is, how we organize and control time, materials, classroom activities, and even technology setup. According to the AECT, instructional technology also involves evaluating teaching tools and processes. To evaluate means to check to see if students are actually learning. We can see from this breakdown that instructional technology is all about what happens in the classroom. That is, applying these scientific methods, products, and ideas to solve teaching and learning problems in the classroom. Now that we know the meaning of education, the meaning of technology, the meaning of educational technology, and the meaning of instructional technology, here are 25 questions on what we have discussed so far. Pause the video after each slide and then solve the questions. Answers will be provided in the comments section. Let us discuss the history of educational technology. To discuss the history of educational technology, we need to correct this confusion between instructional technology and educational technology. In the 1930s, teachers started using devices like radios, projectors, films to help with instruction. Do you know what they called it? They called the use of these machines in teaching the students educational technology at that time. In the 1930s, educational technology using these machines in teaching and learning. However, that definition has evolved. In the 1950s, the systems approach was introduced, as we have discussed, and it made educational technology more about planning, design, and analysis instead of using machines in teaching and learning. But today, what do we know about educational technology? It includes a whole lot of scientific products, resources, and techniques like digital learning, online platforms, AI, interactive media, and more. These things are all considered as educational technology in our era. This tells us that the meaning of educational technology has evolved over the years. So in telling the history of educational technology, it will depend on how you define it. So the question is, why is the history of educational technology not straightforward? The problem is that we don't have a correct way or a correct version of the history of educational technology. Any version of the history is correct. Again, different people define educational technology differently. So for example, some focus on tools, others focus on teaching processes, and others also focus on problem-solving approaches. So depending on the definition, the starting point of the history of educational technology is going to change, because those who focus on tools are going to tell their history differently from those who focus on teaching processes or problem-solving approaches. But before the invention of educational technology, how did they solve problems in education? Before educational technology, teaching was just an art and not a science. This means that teachers relied on their experience, guesswork, trial and error to solve problems in education. There were also no structured methods or scientific processes to plan, deliver, or improve instruction. Teachers were also not trained to critically analyze their teaching methods. This was how teachers solved problems before educational technology. Now let us move straight to talk about the history of educational technology. We are going to start by focusing on those who define educational technology based on tools that are used. Then we move on to those who focus on teaching processes, and then those who focus on problem-solving approaches. Let us start with product-oriented approach. This approach of solving problems in education started in the 1930s, and its focus was on using devices, media, and tools to solve problems in education. This was the first understanding of educational technology, and it was focused on using machines or devices to support learning. Tape recorders were used to facilitate learning. They also made use of television to facilitate learning. Also, radios were used. Film projectors were also used during that era to solve educational problems. It was all about using the tools and materials that were available that time. That is why it is called the product-oriented approach. In the 1930s, the goal was to use tools that are available to make learning more efficient. But there was a problem with this approach. The problem was that the teachers who were using these tools didn't get enough training. They used the tools because they were available. They were new in the system. They were just happy to use it to teach. They didn't use it because they solved a real problem in the education. That was this era, the product-oriented approach, 1930s. Later on, this approach was not that effective. This means that there had to be a change in the approach that was used to solve educational problems in the 1930s. There came the process-oriented approach, which grew after World War II around 1940s to 1950s. So remember, the first approach of educational technology history was the product approach. After the product approach, which was in the 1930s, the next approach that was used was the process-oriented approach, and it was after World War II, that is from 1940s through to 1950s. What was this approach? How different was it from the product approach? This approach focused on improving the teaching and learning process. So it was more about how people learn and not just the tools that they will use to help people to learn. So the process-oriented approach focused on processes that are involved in teaching and learning and not just about the tools that are used. This process approach was borrowed from behavioral science and then the need to train soldiers quickly and effectively during World War II. This brought about the process-oriented approach. So the key idea was programmed instruction. That was B.F. Skinner's teaching machine. It was the main tool that was used during the 1950s to facilitate teaching and learning. Learners could learn on their own through this particular machine called the teaching machine. How did this teaching machine work? First, lessons were broken down into small steps. So the students will operate this machine and then get immediate feedback or reward when correct or correction when wrong. Students were operating it themselves and then getting feedback without any assistance. This teaching machine by B.F. Skinner was mainly used in the process-oriented approach. That is why B.F. Skinner is regarded as the father of technology. So what were the benefits of this teaching machine? First, it helped organize instruction into clear, effective process. Individuals saw teaching as a process and not just about using tools. But there were limitations. One of the limitations was that it was too narrow and then it treated learners like machines. Also, it ignored human emotions, creativity, and real-world situations. So although this was a breakthrough, but it also had limitations. This is the process-oriented approach. Let us talk about the last approach of educational technology history. This started in the 1960s and we call it analysis and design approach, which is also called the systems approach that we discussed earlier. What was the focus of the analysis and design approach during the 1960s? First, it focused on problem solving through deep analysis, just about using tools to teach. And it wasn't about using processes and programmed instruction. It involved problem solving through analysis. This was a big breakthrough. Instead of starting with a tool or technique, educators asked themselves, what is the real problem? What are the factors involved? So before solving an educational problem, these steps were taken into consideration in the analysis and design approach. First, the problem is analyzed. So for example, if students' test scores are low, the problem will first be analyzed to understand the roots of it. Then, the second step is to understand the context, that is, the students, the teachers, the school system, and the resources where the problem arises. And the next step is to choose the best tools, techniques, or solutions. This approach was a problem-solving approach which involved analysis. That is why it was called the systems approach. The approach was systematic. This approach meant that there were some problems that cannot be fixed using a new gadget, as used in 1930s in the product approach. There were also some problems that cannot be solved by one-size-fits-all solution. That is, the teaching machine that was used in the 1950s. This particular approach meant that there must be critical thinking and the problem solving must be systematic. One good example of analysis and design approach was the model by Plum in 1982. It applies to all educational areas. This was the model, and you can use it to solve problems in curriculum, in teaching and instruction, in media use, in measurement and evaluation, and even in policy and management of the school system. Let us talk briefly about Plum's model. It has 5 main stages. The first stage is the analysis stage. This is the stage where we gather information to understand the real issue. The next stage will be the design stage. So after understanding the problem, we now plan solutions. The next will be the development stage. So at this stage, we create the solution that we designed. The next is the implementation stage. This is where we implement a developed solution to actual use, whether in school's classroom or in teacher training. And the last stage is evaluation stage. After trying out the solution, we collect feedback and measure how well the solution worked. So Plum's model is very useful because it encourages planning instead of guessing. It helps improve both teaching and learning, and it connects theory to practice. It can be used in any educational area. This is the analysis and design approach, and it is not a surprise that this approach is still being used today in instructional design, e-learning, and even in education policy making. Let us give a summary of the history of educational technology. This table summarizes everything that we've talked about regarding the history of educational technology. The history of educational technology was told in 3 different approaches. The first approach was the product approach, which focused on the use of tools and devices, and the key period where this approach was used was in the 1930s. Examples of some of the tools that were used were the projector, radio, and television. One advantage was that it introduced technology in education, but one problem was that the tools were misused or underutilized since teachers were not trained to use them. The next approach of the history was the process approach. So the focus of the process approach was how to use teaching techniques and methods, and not about using tools and devices. The key period where this approach was used was in the 1940s through to the 1950s. A typical example of the use of this technique was the programmed instruction by B.F. Skinner. One advantage was that it improved control of instruction. Learners could learn on their own and get feedback, but it was too rigid and ignored learners' needs. The last approach to the history, which is still being used today, is the analysis and design approach. This involves systematic problem solving. The key period where its use started was the 1960s onward. A typical example is the Plum's model, which we just discussed. Advantages are that this particular approach is holistic. It involves everything in the educational sector. It is flexible and it fits all educational areas. But one problem is that it is complex and it takes time. This is a brief summary of the history of educational technology. Now that we've learned the history of educational technology, let us solve some possible questions on the history. Pause the video after each slide and then try your hands on these questions. Answers will be provided in the comment section. Thanks a lot for your time. If you haven't subscribed to our channel, kindly do so. Activate your notifications so that you don't miss our next upload. In the next lesson, we will move on to chapter 2.